So the last thing we looked at was the price elasticity of demand and supply. What does elasticity look at?
How much the price can change.
Is it the price?
Stretch. Or the demand.
Well, if price changes, what will be affected?
The customers.
The quantity.
Okay,
because remember, demand and supply looks at the relationship between price and quantity. So price is normally on the y-axis, and then x is normally the quantity. So do you agree we're looking at both of those factors? And elasticity is looking at how much will the quantity be affected by a change in price. That's what you're looking at. So if something is inelastic, what does that mean?
That the quantity won't change.
Exactly.
Like
so
bread.
yes,
Like bread.
exactly. So the price will change, but it's not going to affect the demand and or supply much in terms of quantity. Then we had unitary elasticity. So if I change price by 1, it'll have 1 as the change in demand or supply in terms of quantity. And then elastic is means what? What's the focus there?
That means that the quantity will change.
Yes.
With the price.
Exactly.
So
it'll change a lot.
Or...
Yeah, it'll change a lot by a small change in price. Good. Right, so I've got a note here, market equilibrium. That will be covered probably here toward the end of the book.
Yeah, it's here.
Did we?
Because yeah, is the.
Yes, there's equilibrium.
This is where we're supposed to start.
Yeah, that's the equilibrium. Here we go. Okay, so that's what we wrote down last time. Interaction of demand and supply, markets in equilibrium and disequilibrium. So equilibrium obviously means demand equals supply. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's write that down. Equilibrium. Equilibrium is where demand equals supply.
So can I just put the heading as equilibrium?
Market equilibrium.
It's actually demand. Okay.
Market equilibrium, looking at demand and supply. So why do we need them to be equal? Well, we need to maximize the utility. And the only way we can do that is by making sure that we produce just enough that is demanded. Because if there's an excess of demand or supply, that's inefficient basically. So ideally in a well-functioning market, you want to meet everybody's needs and wants as best as possible without too much wastage. So that's what demand and supply is looking at. So here they said, we're looking at the interaction between demand and supply, and we're looking at where it's equilibrium, or where we have equilibrium. So the textbook talked about, earlier in the chapter, we analyzed each of them separately, and then we looked at different conditions that affect demand and supply. So demand will be affected by certain factors, and then we would refer back to those that we wrote down previously. Supply will also be affected by certain factors. See before, okay, see the other notes that we wrote down. Okay, and obviously the term equilibrium refers to a situation of balance. So NB, the markets should be balanced, inverted commas, and that's where we have the one equal to the other. Okay, then they talk about the different curves. So obviously demand.
What do you mean by balance? The market should be balanced.
Balance as in demand as close to supply as possible.
So trying to meet their needs as much as possible.
To eliminate wastage. Okay, because remember, if we have excess demand, that's bad. If we have excess supply, that's also bad. Right, so ideally you want to be as close to equilibrium as possible. Because remember, demand is driven by the consumer's needs and wants. So if consumers need and want certain things, and you're not satisfying those needs and wants, what's going to happen? People are going to start like complaining.
Yeah, maybe exporting, or importing.
Possibly, yes. That's a good thing to consider in terms of imports and exports. So we need to meet that supply. And supply, if we have too much, then we're not going to be productive. Well, we're productive, but we have too much, meaning we're not creating the best, let's say,
market,
best product or best services that the market is requiring.
Yeah.
Right, then they give you another example here. This one we do need to draw because that's supply and demand equaled. So I'm going to take this one that we had earlier. Where is it? There's it, this graph. Okay, I'm going to put this graph here, and I'm just going to put some points here. So using a table of values, we sketch demand and supply. That's what you would have to do. So the table of values, let's use the values here. Okay, so insert the table. You need 3 columns. You're going to need price, and then you need quantity demanded and quantity supplied. Okay, so the price is given here, 800, 1000, 1200, 1400, 1600, 1800, and 2000. Yes, so increments of 200. And then the quantity supplied starts with 1. Yeah, 1000, 2000, 3000, so on. So we need to make this smaller. We don't need such a big graph, as long as we've got the values and the points. Okay, so that fits here. Yeah, so I'm just using the example that they've given here in the textbook. Obviously, the numbers will be different depending on the question, but we know that supply will increase with price because quantity supplied will rise. It's directly proportional. And who are we thinking about? The supplier. So do you agree, if the price is higher than what it is today, would you be inclined to produce more or less?
It depends.
So think about producing goods. If you're producing goods and you can sell those goods at 800.
Well, if you can sell them, then you would try to produce more. But if you're not selling them because the price is too high, then you would produce less.
Exactly, yeah. So we'll just look at the producer's point of view.
Yeah.
So if the price had to increase, you would expect the quantity supply to increase as well. That's what you would expect.
That's if the goods are being sold.
Yes. Well, we're assuming that the supplier will produce as much as possible in terms of their price, because in terms of what they can achieve, it would be greater than.
Can I copy this table?
Yeah. Okay. Let's delete that. Okay, and then quantity demanded is the opposite. Right, so the one increases, the one decreases. We've looked at this before.
Okay.
Right, then we need to draw the graph, and the graph is going to look something like this. Just going to plot 2 points on there. So I'm going to use the first one, 800 and 1,000. So this would be 800. Price is 800. You'd be inclined to supply 1,000. And then 2,000 and 7,000. 2,000. Okay, so 2,000. Just wrong side. There we go. 2,000, 1,000, and then 7,000. So this needs to be 7,000. And that's what you've got here. Okay, and then obviously where demand and supply meet, so this cross over here, this bit represents the actual equilibrium price. Okay, where demand and supply are equal, and you've got an overlap between the two graphs. Okay, it's a little bit of revision. We've drawn a graph previously. We're just creating another one, but looking at market equilibrium. So market equilibrium is where your demand equals your supply.
Sorry, it took me long to.
Don't worry. Make good notes, then at least you've got it. That's important. So, and then just 2 lines.
I know for business I make extra notes, which is good for my essays and stuff. Do you think that for economics I should do the same?
It's up to you. You should be going through it again as revision, and then just look at your notes and see, well, have we covered everything, which we probably have. There might be 1 or 2 things that you want to add. So maybe like you like this definition that they wrote there. Like, wouldn't write the definitions, but it's in the book. Like the greenies might be something that you want to write down to add, just because.
Maybe I can do a page of definitions.
Possibly. Good. Yeah, you could maybe just look at that.
The blue is the demand here, I think.
Yeah, demand is always sloping which way?
Up.
Downwards. Downwards. So the one increases and the other decreases. Yeah, so demand is sloping down. Okay, maybe D for demand, D for down. Always slopes down.
But will it always slope down?
Always slope down.
Wow.
It'll never ever slope upwards.
Doesn't the demand also increase?
The demand will increase if the price decreases. Okay, because remember, whose perspective are you looking at? The consumer.
Yeah.
So why would you buy more if things were more expensive?
That's true.
Right, you would always buy more when things are cheaper, and you would always buy less when things are more expensive. That's just how the theory goes in terms of preference. Okay. And then the center point.
So can I just write that down? Demand.
That's supply.
Demand or supply always
upwards.
Down. No,
upwards.
But demand.
Supply.
Yeah, no. Demand always goes down.
Okay, maybe write down demand next to the demand graph.
I was going to write a slide picture. Demand always goes goes down as people will buy less as price increases.
Exactly. Okay, you will always buy less when prices go up. It's just human nature, purely because resources are limited. So you would not demand more when prices go up. You would demand less.
What happens when prices go down? Then will demand also go down?
No, when prices go down, then demand goes up.
So it doesn't always go down.
The graph will always slope downwards because look at this. If I put two little arrows here, okay, what price do I have? Okay, let's look at this axis. What price do I have here? 800. Do you agree?
Mm-hmm.
So now, if I move up, what's going to happen to quantity for demand?
Stay the same.
No, it won't. It will go down. Do you agree? So if I move up, so let's say I start with 800.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if the price is 800, how much is the demand?
7,000.
Exactly, because that's the point on the graph. Alright, so if price had to go up to 2,000, what's the quantity?
Okay. 1,000.
Yes, it has to be.
Yes.
It must be less, because you wouldn't demand more goods at a higher price. Right? You would always demand less goods at a higher price. Okay, so maybe these arrows help a bit, because at least you can see what's happening. I'm going to put this arrow down here. And then let's use two red ones. Okay, and then I'm using a red line. So have a look at supply. How much is the supply when price is 800?
1,000.
Yes. As a supplier, would you supply more or less when price goes up?
More or less.
You would supply more. So if you could sell your goods at 2,000, would you supply more?
Yeah.
Of course you would. Okay, and that's why that slopes that direction. Okay, so when price goes up, supply goes up. When price goes up, demand goes down. Okay, and that's why this graph is always that direction, and this graph is always that direction.
Okay, makes sense.
Okay. Right, let me grab the textbook again and just carry on with the theory. Okay, so that's what they described here. The textbook just talked about equilibrium. We know what that is. It's where the two lines cross. Very important point, because you obviously want to have supply and demand as close to equilibrium as possible. They've also drawn a diagram there, which is good. Right, then they talk about consumers comparing prices of different stores. Is that consideration? Yes. Can consumers search for the best price?
Yeah.
Yes, they can. Here they said the process of market adjustments may not happen instantly. Right, so do you agree people are going to search for the cheapest item? So let's say we go to store A, and store A is selling a product at 800, and then store B is selling a product at 2,000. Which store? Yeah, it's the exact same product. Which store would you buy from?
The 800.
Yes, obviously store A, 800. So what is that going to do to store B's price?
Gonna decrease it.
Exactly. So for store B to stay competitive, store B is going to have to reduce the price because 2,000 is too much. So they are going to have to lower or push down their prices to get closer to equilibrium. Right. What happens if you have a store with price 600? They would increase it exactly, because equilibrium is at a specific point in time. Right? Because if you make something too cheap, everybody's going to want to buy it. Okay, that's like a crazy sale. Like I don't know if you heard about Black Friday that happens every year. Okay, it's like crazy. You don't want to go to the stores or the malls during that time. Okay, maybe you haven't, but it's like it's complete chaos. Why? Because the items are priced at a much lower price than what they normally are. Okay, and they do lots of advertising and marketing as well. So now everybody sees, well, oh, this item that normally costs 2,000 is only priced at 800.
Yeah.
Right. You can see mass demand, craziness, and only limited supply. Right. Then everybody rushes to the store to try and get those, like,
Good.
maybe 20 items that are on sale, and not everybody can get all 20. Okay, because they limit the supply as well. Okay, because do you agree the supplier, i.e. the store, can't sell an infinite number of those goods? Because if they do, it's going to affect what? The equilibrium, their profit as well. So the store will have, that's why they normally say limited quantity.
Yeah.
Because they can't sell
all their TVs,
all the quantity, all the TVs and all the other stuff at a very low price, because that creates what they said here, disequilibrium. Okay, so let's write a note about that. So far we've only looked at equilibrium. We haven't spoken about disequilibrium. It's quite an easy concept to understand. It's just when the market's not in tune, basically. So when you have disequilibrium, let's just spell it correctly, D-I-S and then equilibrium. Equilibrium. Okay, so disequilibrium this observation is applicable when demand and supply are not, in inverted commas, balanced. Best way I can describe this is e.g. Black Friday. Okay, there's a disequilibrium there. Right, you've got massive demand for limited supply. Okay, which creates a problem. Right, so as much as it's nice to get a big discount on an item that you're wanting to buy, it's not so nice for the next person that can't buy the same item.
Yeah.
Right, and that's the problem with that. Okay, you've got massive demand and limited supply. It creates disequilibrium.
Could it also be like massive supply versus limited demand? Definitely.
Okay, and then in that case, you're going to have a write down in price.
What?
Okay, yes, because now there's just too much. So, for example, what's happening in the media about the Viennas and the what else is it? The polony and all of that stuff that has that that listeriosis in what's it called, in not really infection, what's the right word, contamination, that's the right word. So with the listeriosis contamination, in that scenario you could say there's massive supply, there's a lot of that stuff, but no one wants to buy it. Okay, because that's the opposite. See, disequilibrium, and again that creates a problem. Again, then the company obviously takes a loss because they have lots of stock, no one wants to buy it, disequilibrium exists. Okay, next.
Do you know why Woolies is still selling, like they still sell Viennas?
But it's a different make.
Oh, so that one doesn't have...
Yeah, so if you follow the news and the media, I think they found two or three...
I was in Woolies yesterday and I saw the sausages and I was like...
They found 2 or 3 different... what do they call them? Manufacturing plants, like factories. And in those factories, that's where they found the strain of the disease. So any product that was manufactured in those factories were contaminated.
It's because of the certain meat they're using.
I don't think it's the meat. I think it's some. It's probably like a process. So maybe they didn't follow the process completely. I don't know enough about what happened, but. Something happened in the process that contaminated the meat. Yeah, so
it's not the animals that are...
No, it's not the animals. It's how they process the meat. So remember that meat would have come from something, an animal, and then they would have converted into sausages. So now in that process, something went wrong, and there was a contamination of the goods, that's all. So it wasn't all of it. That's why when they had the news broadcast, they said anybody that bought anything that was from that company could return it, and you'd get your money back. Why? Because they don't know which batches were contaminated and which weren't. So I mean, some people could have eaten some of it and it was non-contaminated because it was fine, and then a different batch could have been contaminated because it might have come from that factory. That's all. So even, I mean, I was in Pick n Pay yesterday as well, and I saw a certain brand of sausages, like Vienna's. I was like, oh, okay, but I'll remember that, okay, it wasn't this brand, it was the other brand. So they still, I mean, businesses out there are still making polony and Vienna's and sausages and all that, but just a different company. Yeah, so not to say that all of that stuff is bad, but just there's that big stigma with it now. So like everybody's worried about that because of what had happened. So
but even now, the companies that don't have that disease are
they're also suffering. They're also affected because
like my mom won't buy any ham, anything.
Exactly. So even though like you guys were in Woolies and you saw ham or sausages and that, but just because you thought about that contamination, even though those products are perfectly fine, because they have to be. If the company puts something on their shelves, it has to be safe. It has to be like tested and all of that. So even if you go to, I was at the Milbarton Pick n Pay, that Panorama. It's busy. That one's always busy. So like if you walk past the cheese where they have all the cheese in the fridges, the one fridge is completely like closed off. Yeah, it's like empty, but they've actually put like a screen on top of it. So so it's not they don't show you an open like fridge. They just like put a screen on top. But yeah, so all those products aren't being sold. But the other products that are on the shelves, like you still see the polony, you still see the Vienna's, you still see the sausages and that, but it's a different brand. Yeah, so it's interesting to see what happens with that. But that's a good example of disequilibrium, which is what you said. Massive supply, limited or no demand. Okay, creates a problem. All right, next bit, changing the heading and focus, shifts in demand. Now we're looking at the shifts. Shifts in demand. Okay, first of all, you need to understand what a shift is. So let me draw that. Let me get my demand graph. There's it. Yeah, I'm going to use one that we've used before. Okay, so this graph is in our notes. I'm just going to show it again. Okay, so what is a shift?
Change.
It's more than just a change. It's moving the whole graph. That's the key. So a shift is moving the entire graph. So what does that mean? Well, have a look at this graph. Do you agree? The graph is currently sloping in that direction. If I had to shift the graph, this would be a shift in the graph. That's a shift in the graph. You see that? So I've moved from this point in time to that point in time. Okay, or we can move it the other direction. So we can say the red is the original, we could move it this way, okay, like that direction or that direction. Alright, so that's what we need to draw here. So a little arrow, that's a shift in the graph. Okay, or you could have a shift in the graph in that direction. It doesn't matter, but we're looking at moving the entire graph. That's the key. Right, so why would you have a shift in the demand curve? What do you think could cause that shift?
Changes in trends or
Yes, good.
diseases.
Exactly. That's perfect. So like, if we look at the current scenario, so do you agree? Let's say this demand graph was representing people's purchasing of cold meat products, okay?
Yeah.
Pre-cooked meat products like ham, etc., and so on. Okay, so now if that's the line that's looking at that, do you agree that because we have a contamination, this whole graph is going to shift left or right? Left. Well, you.
Okay, thanks. You okay?
Yes, I believe you had a good birthday.
Yes, you are. Great. We're just talking about it at the gym.
Yeah.
Okay, so all right. So if I'm shifting the graph, do you agree that this is going to move that direction? Why? Because at all levels of price, yes, at all levels of price, people are going to demand less of those products.
You'll probably see the price will also decrease to encourage people to.
Exactly, and that's what you're looking at. So let's write down the ones we've got here. Okay, number one, what will shift the demand graph? Well, there's a few things to consider. They've given you a bit of a discussion point here regarding the shifts in the demand curve, change in demand and change in price. What we need to look at is the factors. So the first factor is the income slash ability to pay for the product. Okay, income slash ability,
These are the factors.
yes, to pay for the product. That's the first factor. Right, so what does that mean? Well, let's try and understand it. So let's assume that every single person in this country wins the lotto.
Yeah.
All right, is that going to increase our income? Definitely. So every single person in this country is going to have a few million sitting in the bank from having won the lottery. Have we increased income? Yes. Is that going to affect demand? Of course. Because now imagine this line being the line for luxury vehicles. Now everybody can buy one, right? What's going to happen to the price of luxury vehicles?
Yeah.
It'll have to go up because the quantity is going to be massively affected because now everybody can afford to buy one.
Yeah.
Right? And that's a problem. So we need to always understand the factors that affect the demand and supply. Obviously, we're looking at demand here, not supply, but we'll get to supply just now. Okay, second one is the price and availability of related products. Price and availability of related products. Related means substitutes. Okay, things that can be used instead of that product. So, for example, let's talk about that whole listeriosis contamination again. So now, obviously, we know that Viennas and polony and what is the other one? Sausages aren't like so good. We should be worried about them. Okay. So now, do you agree? Related products could be what? Bacon.
Yeah.
Okay, bacon is not polony. It's not. Bacon is just meat.
Really processed.
It's not processed, exactly. Bacon is just meat that they've cut into very thin slices that can be fried or grilled to make it crispy. So bacon is a related product that could be affected by what happened.
Yeah.
So now nobody's buying Viennas, but now we can all buy bacon. Right, so bacon could be seen as like a substitute. So the price and the availability of related products would affect the demand. That's what we're looking at.
Probably have bacon rolls instead of ham rolls.
Exactly, yeah. So, I mean, if people still like a form of like cold meat for sandwiches and things like that, well then you'd have to look at other options. And bacon could be one of the options. Right, the last one is what you actually said. Trends. So fashion, tastes, and attitudes. Fashion, comma, tastes, comma, attitudes. Right, and all of those three can move the graph left or right depending on what's happening in the market. So let's say the fashion trend is maybe I don't know, let me think of a product, something that's, or can you think of one? Because you're probably closer to like trends. So have you seen a trend in fashion, maybe, that has like blown up? So before,
Adidas.
okay, so something like Adidas that maybe wasn't so popular in the past, and then all of a sudden people just love this brand, or they
Because
just
it's got more of a trend in the fashion world now. It used to just be like tackies, maybe
Yes.
sportswear.
Okay.
And now they have like a everyday fashion.
Okay, so see, that's a change in taste or trend or attitude even. So that's good. So with that, you're looking at what?
An increase in
A change in demand, either positively or negatively. So people are going to require more of that product at all levels of price,
Yeah.
or less, depending on whatever's happening. Okay, perfect. All right, so those are the three, and then they've just shown what I've shown. See?
Yeah.
Then they've just drawn the
Just
graphs,
draw
like what
it.
you've done there, yeah. So moving forward or back, depending. Now they're looking at each of these in more detail. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take what I wrote here and just move the headings across, because we need to explain each one separately. That's the next part. Okay, so
Can I
they've
see
given...
right to the bottom?
Yeah,
Sorry.
sure. Don't stress. Okay, so we were discussing the shifts, and we know these are the three. So the textbook talks about each of the three separately, and that's what we need to look at here. Okay, so what does number one focus on? We've already spoken about it, but let's just add more notes to the notes. Okay, so number one, I'm going to add some lines there. We need to add to it. So this is what the textbook says. Income/ability to pay. What influences someone's ability to pay for a product? Two things. Number one, an individual's income, or more specifically, the purchasing power of their income. There we go. So, when looking at an individual, consumers' purchasing power is affected by income. So if their income had to rise, their purchasing power would increase. This will move the graph, or shift the graph. Shift the graph. Second bit, number two, they say the availability of loans or credit and the interest that must be paid on the loans or credit depending on the market. So number two, second consideration, consumers' ability, or maybe not ability, consumers' credit / debt. Consumers' credit / debt, brackets, how much credit can they apply for? Right, so do you agree, if someone has a line of credit that's a lot bigger than before, meaning let's say you only qualify for 1,000 in terms of a loan, but now you qualify for 1 million. What has happened to their inverted commas income? It's not really income, but it's the ability to pay.
But it's increased.
Yes, it's increased. Good. So this income and ability to pay is looking at the money that's available in terms of what they have, i.e. their savings or their income, compared to the debt that they have access to. So credit or debt. Those two things are important. Right, so if people have more access to credit, that's automatically going to increase the spending, okay, the demand. Right, it just makes sense. If people can get credit, people will spend more. That's just how people are. Okay, it's not always a good thing. You should be careful what you spend on if you're taking out loans to buy stuff. Okay, because loans are liabilities, and we know from accounting, liabilities are bad. You don't want a liability, you'd rather want an asset.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Right, so that's that bit. Okay, next one. The textbook gives a few extra points here about the price and availability of related products. Here they said, in the case of substitute products, a change in the price, availability, and even the attractiveness of one product will impact the demand for all substitute goods. Competition amongst substitute goods, brackets. This could be quality, comma, it could be, what else did they mention here? Attractiveness, availability, preference, attractiveness. All of that is going to affect the competition amongst those substitute goods. So the key there is the word substitute goods, related products. There wasn't much there. They just talked about duck and pork. So those are both types of meat. Which would be a better substitute for duck and pork? So do you agree chicken would substitute duck? Or chicken could be a substitute for duck or turkey. Pork, a substitute for pork could be beef maybe or lamb. Okay, those are different products. So the one product is a substitute for one. So obviously poultry, if we're looking at chicken and duck, maybe even other types of meat like ostrich. What other bird meat do you get? Chicken,
ostrich.
Duck, turkey, yeah, and ostrich.
Do you eat those like?
Yeah, I've eaten all of them.
Do you like them?
Ostrich is actually very healthy. It's a very lean form of meat. So people that are on a very, very strict diet would always eat ostrich over like chicken because ostrich is leaner. The amount of fat in ostrich is minimal compared to your chicken, your turkey, your duck. Yeah, I don't particularly like it. It's not great. It
tastes different.
It does taste different. Yeah. You can actually buy ostrich in the stores even.
I've even seen ostrich biltong.
Ostrich biltong, yes.
My mom's bought that a few times, but I don't.
You don't eat it, okay. Yeah. It's just meat. It's just meat, but it comes from a different animal. Okay. Alright, and then the last one, the textbook talks about fashion, taste, and attitudes. Just to pull out something else here, they say, find a detailed understanding of the psychological motives that determine our behavior and preference, because this will influence our individual likes and dislikes. Something as simple as peer pressure is also mentioned here, and they talk about marketing, advertising. Right, so the last bit. So what can affect our fashion, our taste, and our attitudes? Well, there's a few things. The first thing they talked about here is behavior. So how do consumers behave? Behavior. That's the first thing. So if the behavior changes, so for example, behavior is a nice one to consider because I'm going to use technology as an example. Before we had tablets, everybody had to use a laptop.
Yeah.
Now we've got tablets. We don't really need laptops. Okay, and now we've even got really sophisticated phones. Phones can probably do just as much as a tablet. So you might just have a phone that instead of a tablet as well. Yeah, well, the screen size would be a factor, but behavior is what we're looking at there. Okay, so people don't buy. So, for example, people don't buy in terms of CDs that much because now you can stream things, okay, or even DVDs. Right. The other thing they talked about here, other than behavior, was psychological motives. Psychological. How do you spell that? S-C-Y. S-Y-C-H-O. Psychological.
I don't think anybody can spell that word. Psychological. Is it like all that?
Yeah, because it has that silent ph. That psychological. Psychological. What is it again? Motives. That was it. Motives. Okay. Something else they mentioned here. Fashionable and cool. They even used the word cool in the textbook. Fashionable. So what's fashionable / cool? Then they also use the words peer pressure, advertising, and marketing. So peer pressure, comma, advertising, and marketing. Right, so now we've got a list of things to consider here that affect fashion, taste, and attitudes. That's all they're describing. They're just describing different considerations when looking at that. Right, so you could explain any one of those factors and that would justify the shift in the demand. Right, new topic, shift in the supply. So let's draw that graph. I'm going to take this one. I'm going to paste that there, and I'm going to just change this. Supply. Okay, so we're going to look at the factors, shifting or moving the entire graph. Do you agree this graph needs to change shape? Right, so the graph needs to slope that direction. Here we go. And this needs to shift. Something like that. Okay, so again, we can move things this direction, or we can move things in that direction. Okay, I need to change the color of the arrows just now. I'll do it just now. This must be supply. S-U-P-P-L-Y. Supply. Let's change all these colors. Where's the graph? Where's the graph? Right, there we go. Okay, so that's supply, and then arrows need to change color. Let's delete them. Right, so if I'm looking at supply, what do you think will change, or shift rather, the supply graph?
The resource allocation.
Resources, how would that change the supply graph?
Like if there's a decrease in the resources available.
Okay, so you're looking at production, yes. So you're thinking about production in terms of the supply, exactly, that's good. Right, the first one, let's just explain at the beginning again, shift in the supply graph, it's what we're discussing here. Right, instead of demand, we're shifting supply. So the graph is sloping upwards, we'll move it to the left or we'll move it to the right.
Are we going to speak about each point again?
Yes.
Okay, then.
So causes of the shifts in supply. The first one, costs.
So this refers to the supply and the production, correct?
Yes, because it's supply, yeah. Supply is always supplier. Supply is looking at how much are we willing to produce at a specific level. First one, costs. Second one, size and nature of the industry. Third, government policy. And fourth, other. Right, that's what the textbook gives you. Okay, now we need to expand on those factors. So shifts in supply and then we need to write them all down here. Okay, so number one, costs. Right, so what do you think the costs are going to do to the graph? Move it left or right? Would suppliers be inclined to produce more or less?
Depends if it's in demand.
No, you're not looking at demand. You're looking at the supplier. So as a supplier, if costs had to go up, would you be more inclined to produce more or less?
No.
Would you?
Or less,
So,
you should make the same amount.
Yeah, you'd have to make less because the costs have gone up. Good. Right, so here they describe the costs. In a market-based economy, no business can exist indefinitely if it makes losses. So companies will have to make supply decisions on the basis of the price that they can get for selling the product. Right, do you agree? If you're manufacturing a product, we need to know how much can I sell the product for. If any factor pushes up costs, there is a likely shift leftward in the supply curve or a decrease in supply. If costs are reduced, there'll be an increase in supply. Okay. Right, let's write that down. So when costs increase, graph shifts left. Bracket, less supply. That's point number one.
Graph, so basically?
It shifts left. It moves left.
So what does that mean? When
the costs go up, the graph shifts left. Why? Less supply at all price levels. Okay, then the second one, when costs decrease, graph shifts right. And why? Because it's cheaper to produce. Cheaper to produce, make more. That's what you're looking at. Number two. Two was size and nature of the economy. I'm just going to copy my points from the previous slide. Okay, there's it. Okay, great. So two, let's discuss it. The textbook says, size and nature of the industry. It is clear that there is a substantial profit to be made by selling a product. The businesses inside and outside the industry are likely to react. Those currently in the industry may invest capital, equipment in an attempt to grow bigger and take advantage of the situation. Right, so this is looking at existing, established producers or suppliers, let's use the word suppliers, versus new entrants. And that's what they're describing here. So when looking at an industry, depending on how big or small the industry is, that supplier is either going to produce more product, and they could look at investing capital in other areas to produce other products. So for example, you have a technology company. I think Samsung's a nice example, even Apple, but they don't produce as much other products. But if we just talk about Samsung, so Samsung's got what? Cell phones. Yeah. But they've also got TVs, laptops, dishwashers, air conditioners. They've got the whole works. Right, and that's something that they've looked at in terms of size and nature of the industry. Okay, versus like Apple, where they're competing in the cell phone market, but now you don't get an Apple air conditioner, or you don't get an Apple washing machine. All right, so it's a little bit different.
They should do that though. That'd be quite cool. I think that'd make money.
What I did see last year, there was an article about Apple considering building a car. An Apple car. Yeah. So you can Google and you can find it. Yeah. There was some speculation about that. So I don't know if it is going to materialize or not. Sometimes companies test things.
Yeah.
So they test, well, is it a good idea to make this, or this, or this, or this? And who knows, maybe in the future they might. But that was something that I read last year in the media. Okay, so that's looking at the size and nature of the industry. Do you agree bigger firms are more likely to adapt to changes in the market versus smaller firms? That's also something that they mentioned here. They talk about the size of the industry, and they talk about more firms or bigger firms likely to supply, the industry will increase. So we need to add that as well. So we spoke about the nature of the business, so existing versus established, or existing/established suppliers versus new entrants. Something else would be the size of the businesses, so big business versus small. Big business versus small. Okay, that's also something to consider. The big business versus small is also something to consider versus the nature, because size is one thing to consider. The size of a industry will determine whether or not people are more likely or not to produce goods.
Is it because, like, if there's a change in trends or fashion and they have to change, they have more capital available and maybe resources to adapt?
That could be a factor you could consider. But remember, if you're looking at shifts in supply, you're not worrying about the change in preference or taste, because that's shift in demand. So supply is what will change the producer's production. Okay, irrespective of what the consumer wants or needs. Right, remember, you always keep things separate. So ceteris paribus, in terms of shifting supply, you would assume that demand is the same. But what will determine whether a supplier will produce more or less? The size and the nature of the industry. Right, so if I was a big business, okay, I would produce more product. If I was a small business, I would produce less product. It all depends on the size and nature of the actual supplier. It's not about the consumer. That's where you need to be careful when you're looking at this, because it's specific to a shift in supply or a shift in demand. Right now, the shift in supply is the important bit. So NB here, maybe just to add something, only consider the supplier's actions. So what is the supplier going to do? That's the key. Right, don't worry about this, the demand. Yes, the demand can affect the supply, but that's what we're looking at. We're just looking at shifts in supply only. Right, number 3 is government policy. And here they talk about taxes. So specific taxes will affect specific businesses. Best example I can give you here, e.g. sugar tax.
Alcohol.
Yes, sin taxes, all of that. Sin taxes. Right, but maybe to talk about the sugar tax, because that's actually quite new. The sugar tax came into effect last year, where cold drink, so your Coca-Cola, your appetizer, all the nice fizzy drinks that people sell in the store, all of those drinks are now affected by this new tax. So now if we're producing Coca-Cola, are we going to produce more or less? We'll produce less because of the sugar tax, yeah. But remember, it's not about because people buy less. It's just because it's more expensive for us to produce and to sell it at a specific cost or price. Because now we might be producing, let's just say, a 2-liter bottle of cold drink costs 10 Rand to produce. Let's just assume that. Right, but now there's a tax on that. So if there's a tax on that, the cost has actually gone up because the company now needs to pay the government for
producing Coke.
Yes, that's how it works. Okay, that's how the sugar tax works.
I thought the tax only comes in when the consumer pays.
No, it's the production. So if Coca-Cola produces X amount of cold drink bottles, every cold drink bottle that they produce will have a sugar tax. Okay, because the company has to pay it, not the consumer. The consumer will pay a higher price, but that's built into the pricing anyway. Okay, but we're not looking at the consumer. See, that's the point I'm trying to make. You're looking at the supplier, not the consumer. Okay, and then the last one is other. So they've just given a short paragraph here. They say other supplying influencing factors. These are varied and often specific to a specific industry or activity. They talked about weather conditions. Can the weather affect supply? Definitely. Let's say we're a farmer. Yeah, and now we had lots of drought. The drought is going to affect our crop negatively, exactly, and that's going to reduce the supply or increase the supply. So that's the last bit. So other, such as weather, comma. They also talk about political crisis, politics. They also talk about, they even talk about food here actually. They talk about shocks. Okay, so shocks, they talk about exogenous shocks. Unanticipated exogenous shocks. So that will be like a drought. That will be like an earthquake, a fire, tornado. Okay, those are like natural disasters. I'm not going to use exogenous shocks. I'm just going to write down natural disasters. Right, so anything external. Could that affect the supplier? Definitely. Right, and that covers that. Okay, the last bit of this chapter, and remember this is the long chapter. We've got 2 more things to cover.
So it was just weather and natural disasters?
No, weather, natural disasters, politics.
What do you mean by politics?
Politics would be a country. So for example, in a country like, let's think of South Africa actually. Okay, let's look at our country, politics. So do we import lots of goods?
Yeah, we do.
Yes, we do.
I do.
Yeah, so all businesses have local and international providers of goods and services. So the South African economy is actually based more on imports than exports. Right? We actually import a lot more than we export. Right? Something as simple as fuel. Right? We don't have the capacity to manufacture our own petrol. Right? We've got like refineries and things like that, but we still need to buy the oil.
Yeah.
Right? Sasol can only do so much, but they need the oil. Okay, so with something like that, we're importing oil. Even luxury goods, so your Apple, your Samsung, your BMW, your Mercedes-Benz.
Even just trends and fashion.
Exactly, even just clothing. Most of the clothing that people are wearing come from
overseas
other countries, other places. Be it from more developed markets or more developing markets, it doesn't matter. But generally, we're importing our goods. And that could be our politics. So if we had to change the politics, let's assume the government said, well, we're not going to buy anything from overseas. Everybody that lives in this country must buy from its own suppliers. That's politics. Would that affect the suppliers? Definitely. Okay, suppliers will be affected.
It would affect the overseas suppliers as well.
It would affect them, but they're overseas suppliers. But local suppliers would benefit.
Yeah.
Exactly, and that's why you've got that whole proudly South African thing. That's why some items have that logo, proudly South African. It's because it's
made from very some people's pride as well.
Exactly. Exactly. That's something to consider. Okay, good, nice. All right, so last bit, then we can complete this chapter. There's literally 3 pages left. We need to put a new heading.
I have to start a whole new page.
Yeah, the last page is actually separate because it's looking at excesses.
Okay.
Yeah, but it still relates to all of that. So still chapter 2. Remember, chapter 2 is long.
Yeah.
This was like 60 pages or something. Okay.
Can I just look how much information is there? So I know how
Sure.
to do?
Yeah, there's 3 pages left. The excesses
On
is
this
what.
page?
No, that's
This
one.
page?
Yeah, we're starting there.
Okay.
Changes in the equilibrium. That's what we're looking at. Changes in equilibrium. Yeah, that's it.
Because there's only like 3 sections.
Yeah, but we need to
One,
do an example here, a calculation.
2, 3, 4.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So the first bit, heading, changes in equilibrium. Notice this is a change, not a shift. What is a shift? It's when I move the whole graph. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Okay, a change is when I change the graph. I could maybe change the slope. Right, those are slightly different considerations. Okay, so changes in equilibrium. This focuses on the existing graphs that are drawn. we analyze and interpret the changes on the graph. That's what you're looking at. So I'm not going to be looking at shifting or moving the graph. I'm just going to be looking at the graph. And I'm going to be looking at a change in demand and a change in supply for the actual graphs. That's what you're looking at here. Okay, so number one, change in demand. What does that involve? Well, the paragraph here says, if you look at figure 2.16, have a look at it quickly.
Okay, can I just write that down?
Okay.
Sorry. This focuses on...
Yeah, we're just looking at the graphs that are drawn. That's the key thing. So you're not shifting the graphs, i.e. you're not drawing a new graph. You're just looking at the current graph.
Yeah.
That's the focus. That's what's different about this section compared to the one we just looked at. The one that we looked at was looking at moving the entire graph, like lifting it up and moving it left or moving it right.
We analyze and interpret the changes in... Is that like a heading?
No, it's just a separate point that relates to the first bit. Yeah, so the first 2 points are together, and then the key is the next heading. So if you want to write a heading, change in demand can be a heading.
Changes.
That's just general theory about this section. And then we've got the two changes here. That can be separate, 1 and 2.
Okay, so
Number one,
changes in
change in demand.
Okay.
The heading is changes in equilibrium.
Change in demand. So this is how there's a change in equilibrium.
Yes. Yeah, so change in equilibrium means we're moving.
Change in demand.
Okay, so change in demand here in the textbook, number one. Let's read it. They say, look at the figure. Notice we are using P and Q symbols again instead of actual numbers. Okay, it doesn't matter what we use. P is for price, Q is for quantity. If there's an increase in demand, then in the original price, there will now be disequilibrium. Excess demand. As suppliers begin to recognize this, will start to raise the price, and this will give rise to an increase in quantity supplied. The rise in price will lead some consumers to decide to not want to buy the product at the higher price. Okay, so look at this graph. Okay, do you see supply and demand?
Yeah.
Okay, where is the supply and demand graph?
Yes.
There's supply, there's demand. Good. Okay, so now what happens if I'm going to be looking at a change in equilibrium? So a change is, well, I'm changing where I am now to that point, exactly, where you're looking at a different point on the actual graph. And that's what they're describing here, because I'm looking here, because I'm looking at a specific price. Right, so they're describing the changes in supply and demand. So how does demand change? Describe it to me. When prices increase, the related demand, quantity demanded, does what? Decrease or increase?
Increase.
Decrease. Okay, because remember, demand is inversely related to agree.
Yeah.
If the one goes up, the other comes down. Right, I'm just going to put a note here. We'll see example later. We'll do one just now, just to work out the see example later. Okay, number 2, change in supply. When prices increase, the related quantity supplied decreases S here and increases here, like that. And that's what we're looking at. So again, we need to look at an example to see how this actually works. It's difficult to explain it now because we don't have an example. Just remember the basic concepts regarding demand and supply. Demand increases, supply decreases. Supply increases.
Just let me quickly, I'm getting confused, sorry.
Okay.
This is separate.
There is one last note here. They talk about a change in supply and demand. So we have a change in both. When both supply and demand change,
And prices increase and related quantities.
yeah, so the one is increase, the one is decrease, decrease, so opposites. Okay, so demand has the opposite effect. If I increase demand, I'll decrease the quantity demanded. With supply, if I increase the supply, I will increase the quantity supplied. Okay, so they've actually chosen to use diagrams here just to show this whole idea of a change. And I see they've also brought in the shifts as well, which is good because at least you can see that the equilibrium point does change as well because there's a change in equilibrium. So equilibrium is not set in stone because demand and supply can change. So it's a moving like target in a way. Okay, so when supply and demand change, equilibrium will...
Is that just a separate consideration?
Yeah, these are just other points to consider. We'll move. Okay, it's just looking at those graphs. When we have something like this, where's the graph? There's it. Okay, so now if I have a graph like this, do you agree I can shift this line? Let me just draw a separate line. Let's get a separate line. Okay, so for example, if that's the graph that I'm looking at, can I shift the demand? Possibly. If I do, what's going to happen to equilibrium? It's going to move up, not down. Do you agree? And can I shift it down? Yes, I can.
It's just the equilibrium point that's going to change.
Yes, that's what they're looking at. And then they're also looking at the supply. So now if the graph is that direction, it's changing. With that direction, it's changing. And that's all you're looking at. They're just describing it here with the use of diagrams. Okay, where they're showing you this whole idea of movement in price and quantity and the associated change in equilibrium. Right, and then we've reached the end, the last 2 points, consumer surplus and producer surplus. Okay, got that?
Yeah.
Alright, so let's put 2 last headings here. Looking at chapter 2. One heading for consumer surplus. And then we need one for producer surplus just now.
Is those the last 2 headings for the chapter?
That's the last 2. Okay.
Maybe let me draw a diagram and take up space.
No, we're going to draw one later
okay.
to show the working here, the calculation.
So I'll do the example.
You can do it just now. Yeah, we'll do 2 diagrams.
Okay.
Okay, so first of all, we need to understand what this means. Consumer surplus, who do you think this relates to?
Consumers, customers.
So demand and supply.
So the demand.
Demand. Okay, there's the first bit. This focuses on the demand curve. Okay, so where's my demand curve? We need to bring it down. There's it. I need to take this bit. And I need to move it here. Oh, it didn't copy everything. Come on. Right, so that's the demand curve. Do you agree? It can be straight or it can be curved. So the textbook diagrams show you this curve. Right, it doesn't matter. What is important though is how do we calculate or measure the consumer surplus? First of all, we need to understand what this is. So let's put a note about it. We've said it focuses on the demand curve. That's how we drew it. Here they said the underlying principles behind the demand curve are relatively simple to understand. They are also ones that many of us follow in our daily lives. For instance, when a product is on special offer in a local shop and its price has been reduced, more will be demanded and purchased. Okay, that's self-explanatory. Do you agree?
Mm-hmm.
So when goods are cheap, quantity demanded rises. That's the first bit that they spoke about. Second part, for any good or service, however, there are always some people who are prepared to pay above the given price to obtain it. So, certain consumers are always willing to pay more for whatever reason, but there are people that have that psychological tendency in terms of action. Okay, so the first thing is most people buy more when things are cheap. Some people pay more for goods irrespective of its price.
Because sometimes I think if you pay more, the quality is better, or they want to pay more.
Possibly, yeah, there are different factors. Okay, so someone might just pay more for something because they want it now.
Yeah.
So, for example, pre-ordering for something
Yeah.
versus waiting for it to come out. Okay. The next bit. Some of the best examples where this happens are in the cases of tickets to popular music concerts. There we
Yeah.
go. Okay, so now you obviously know there are like VVIP, then there's VIP, and there's just like average, normal. Okay, so something as simple as that. That's what they're talking about here. So tickets to a popular football game, okay, such as Liverpool or Manchester United, or in India to see a major cricket test where all the tickets are sold out. The stated price may well be $40 per ticket, but there are always some people that are willing to pay more than $40 to obtain a ticket. Right, so the ticket price for an event could be sold out. Okay, let's say Justin Bieber comes to South Africa again. Okay.
When he came in 2013, I had the meet and greet tickets. Actually.
Yes. Okay, so and he came last year.
Yeah, but he didn't sell those tickets.
He didn't sell those meet and greet tickets. But let's assume that the tickets are all sold out for that event. Now, if tickets are sold out for that event, do you agree the ticket price doesn't change?
No.
Okay, so let's say you bought a VVIP ticket, and let's say the ticket price was I don't know, 10,000. Okay, if it's 10,000 for a VVIP ticket, there's only maybe, let's say, 100 of them.
Yeah.
Okay, but now there are other people that still want the same tickets. So would someone be willing to pay more than 10,000 for that ticket?
Yeah.
Yes, and that's what they're looking at here. Okay, yes, because it's sold out. Right, because quantity is scarce or limited. Alright, so that's the concept. They say consumer surplus. The definition, maybe you might want to write that down. That's quite a nice definition. The difference between the value of a consumer places on a unit consumed and the payment needed to actually purchase that product. You see, so for a big fan, they would pay probably double to get that VVIP ticket if they didn't have one. Right, that's important. So let's write down the definition. The difference between the value a consumer places on units consumed and the payments needed to actually purchase the products. Right, and that kind of looks at people's preference in a sense, because someone might be willing to pay more than what the price is. Right, so you might quote X for a specific ticket, but because they are all sold out, X isn't the actual price because someone would be willing to pay more than X for that same ticket. And that's what they're looking at here in terms of this whole idea of consumer surpluses. Right, so then they say consumer surplus arises because some consumers are willing to pay more than the given price for all but the last unit they buy. That's the definition there, just underneath the heading, or just underneath this green box. Right, and that's something important to note, is because the price is not always the price. The price is just what the ticket sales organizer is willing to accept for the ticket. But in the market will still determine what the actual price is. Right? And if there's a limit on the actual quantity, then you could have a scenario where people are willing to pay more. And that's why they highlight this side of the graph, which is what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to draw a little triangle. I hope they have a triangle shape here. Do they? Yes, they do. Great. Okay, and let's draw it. Right, so what is consumer surplus? Consumer surplus is this, the area underneath the curve. Okay, that's what you're looking at, that little bit there. Okay, so in the diagram, CS, can I write CS? You understand what that is?
Yeah.
Consumer surplus.
Yeah.
CS equals area of the triangle. That's what you're actually looking at, and that's what they're describing here. That's why in the diagram you see they've highlighted it.
Yeah.
Because you're looking at consumer surplus based on the price, right? So the price is going to be the amount greater than it.
So this is the demand.
The demand graph, and then you would have to highlight what's underneath the graph as the surplus. See, this shaded region is the consumer surplus. I'm going to label that actually. I think that's worthwhile doing. Okay, so I'm going to label this consumer surplus. And then I need to draw a little arrow and point to that region in the actual graph. Right, so that's what you're looking at there in terms of consumer surplus. It's the actual amount that is above what the current price is.
Why is this like not included? This because it only starts there.
No, you can actually move this at any point. So I can even make this smaller. I can do it from there.
Oh, it all depends on the price they're willing to pay.
It all depends on the price that you're looking at here. So don't always think it's the whole area. It's just the price that you're looking at. So maybe that's a good point to write down. Okay, consumer surplus is analyzed at a specific price. So they need to tell you what the price is. They will say, what is the consumer surplus at this price? Or what is the consumer surplus at that price? It needs to be at a price. So it doesn't have to be the whole triangle. It can be a portion of it, but it's just at a price. That's the key. Okay, a specific price. Got that?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, and then last bit, last page, producer surplus. So let's copy this diagram. Okay, let's change it and let's put better comments here. Okay, so producer surplus, producer surplus. This focuses on the supply curve. Okay, I need to delete all of this stuff. Okay, producer surplus. We need to draw the supply curve. Let's go get that from previously. Where's our diagram? There's our diagram. Okay, so draw your little supply curve. There's my supply curve. And then we need to label it. Okay, let's first cover the theory. So let's write some points down. Okay. Producer surplus. In certain respects, producer surplus is a similar concept to consumer surplus. However, we are looking at the situation from the producer's or supplier's perspective. See, that's the key. Producers are very keen to supply consumers who are willing to pay for a good at a specific price above that which they would normally be prepared to accept. There's the key. All suppliers would want their consumers to pay them more than the price they are willing to accept. Right, that just makes sense. If you're supplying a product, you would definitely want someone to pay more than what you're offering it at. Does it make sense? Okay, because as a supplier, you want the most for the products. The textbook goes on and they say, a typical example of this would be in a situation such as airfares, right, so flights. Suppose the baseline price for a flight from Islamabad to London is $800. This is what, on average, the airline sees as a fair price. Right, so do you agree, if we fly in a plane, the price to fly in the plane is $800. Are people going to be willing to pay more for a flight on that plane?
More than the price.
More than the price they are willing to accept. To pay them more than the price they are willing to accept. All suppliers, there's a missing S here, all suppliers would want their consumers to pay them more than the price they are willing to accept. Right, so I'm willing to accept 10, but my consumer is willing to give me 20. Of course you're going to take it. Right, because that's a producer surplus. See? Right, and then they're talking about airfares here. Okay, flight. So here's an example. A flight from Islamabad to London is $800. This is what, on average, the airline sees as a fair price for such a flight and is the minimum that it's prepared to accept. Yeah. Right, so if you're going to fly from this city to that city, it's going to cost $800. Are certain passengers going to be willing to pay more?
Yeah.
Why?
If it's the last tickets available.
Good, perhaps.
Business class.
Or, yes, different classes, exactly, good. Right, so that's why someone would be paid or be willing to pay more for it. It's because a flight is a flight. Okay, whether you're sitting in business class, economy class, or, yeah.
You're still going to get there.
You're still going to get to the same destination, exactly. But the price will differ. See, that's what they even said here. They said some customers that are more likely to have not booked their flight in good time before the flight would have urgent business in the UK. Such customers will be providing additional revenue to the airline over and above the typical fare. Okay, so for someone that's in a rush, let's say they're booking flights last minute.
Yeah.
Right, in that case, they might be willing to pay more because they have to attend business, whatever the case is. That's what they've used here. Okay.
Can I have the definition that they gave?
Yes. Yeah, I'm going to write the same one down here.
The difference between the price.
Producer surplus, difference between the price a producer is willing to accept and what is actually paid. Right. Let's always look at this whole consideration between what are you willing to accept versus what the market is willing to give you. Right. Similar to what we had earlier with the consumer. Okay, there they were looking at, well, what are they willing to pay? This is looking at what we're willing to accept because this is the producer. So again, have a look at the diagram. Which way is this graph sloping? Upwards. So the shaded region is on the left or the right? Still on the left. Okay. Yes, that's the last bit, yeah, and that wraps up that chapter. Is that it? Yeah, perfect. Chapter 2 completes. Just to shade it in, I want this little diagram, this little square, triangle, and I need to put this over here. there we go. Let's just label it. So this bit over there is called the producer surplus. It's the difference between what is accepted by the supplier versus what is actually paid. Okay, so that the actual payment could be more than what they were willing to accept, and that's obviously ideal because all suppliers would want to receive more than what they're expecting. Perfect, and that covers that chapter.